While separation of powers is Montesquieu's most famous contribution, the spirit of the laws contains other crucial insights that profoundly influenced constitutional thinking and deserve attention. First, different governments suit different conditions, political relativism, and contextual design. Montesquieu emphatically was not a one-size-fits-all thinker. Throughout The Spirit of the Laws, he argues that appropriate political systems vary with geography, climate, culture, economy, size, history, and social conditions. What works brilliantly in one context might fail catastrophically in another. Small city-states can sustain direct democracy, where citizens know each other personally and can actually assemble to deliberate. Large nations with dispersed populations must use representation because direct participation is physically impossible. Commercial societies with complex economies need different legal systems than simple agricultural societies. Property laws must reflect economic realities. Contract enforcement becomes crucial in commercial republics, but matters less in subsistence societies. Climate and geography shape social relations and appropriate institutions. Hot climates produce different social structures, family relations, and governmental needs than cold climates. Island nations face different challenges than continental powers. Mountains create natural barriers that affect political organization. This relativism troubled some Enlightenment thinkers who sought universal principles applicable everywhere. But Montesquieu's point wasn't that anything goes or that all systems are equally good. Rather, abstract theories must adapt to concrete circumstances. Institutional design must fit context or it will fail.
This influenced American founders' pragmatism. They didn't try to implement pure theory or copy any existing system entirely. They designed institutions suited to American circumstances. A large federal republic spanning diverse states with different economies, climates, and cultures. They adapted Montesquieu's principles to their specific situation rather than applying them mechanically. Second, the importance of intermediate powers, social pluralism, and institutional buffers. Montesquieu argues that between the supreme authority, monarch or popular sovereignty, and individual citizens, you need intermediary institutions, nobility, local governments, professional associations, religious bodies, regional parliaments, corporate entities. These create buffers, preventing direct confrontation between absolute central power and atomized individuals. Without intermediate powers, you have either tyranny, centralized authority crushing individuals who have no collective organization to resist, or anarchy, masses overthrowing all authority with no stable institutions to replace it. Intermediate institutions serve multiple functions. They provide alternative centers of authority that can resist central tyranny. They organize citizens into communities with collective identity and interests. They create multiple overlapping allegiances that prevent any single authority from claiming total loyalty. They're shock absorbers in the political system, moderating conflicts before they reach a crisis. This influenced thinking about federalism and civil society. Power should be dispersed not just horizontally among branches, but also vertically among levels of government and socially among various institutions and associations. Liberty depends on multiple centers of power, none supreme, none able to dominate all others. Third, moderation as the supreme political virtue. Throughout The Spirit of the Laws, Montesquieu consistently advocates moderation, balance, and avoiding extremes. He opposes absolute monarchy, but also warns against pure democracy. He supports commerce, but cautions against pure commercialism. He values religion, but opposes theocracy. He wants liberty, but recognizes that unlimited liberty becomes license.
The best political systems, for Montesquieu, are mixed governments combining different elements: monarchical efficiency, aristocratic wisdom, democratic legitimacy. No single principle pursued absolutely, but multiple goods balanced carefully against each other. This moderation permeates his entire approach to politics. He's suspicious of revolutionary upheaval and utopian schemes. He prefers gradual evolution, incremental change, and adaptation to circumstances over radical transformation based on abstract principles. Fourth, the rule of law rather than the rule of men. Constitutionalism as fundamental. Perhaps Montesquieu's deepest contribution is insistence that laws, not individuals, should rule. Even kings must follow laws. Even judges must apply them consistently according to established principles. The moment government becomes personal, based on whoever's in charge rather than predetermined rules, liberty dies. Constitutional government means government bound by law, where officials exercise authority according to predetermined rules, rather than personal whim or arbitrary discretion. This requires written laws, regular procedures, and predictable enforcement. Citizens must be able to know what's required of them and plan their lives accordingly. When law rules rather than men, everyone, from the highest official to the poorest subject, stands equal before it. No one is above the law. No one can change rules arbitrarily to benefit themselves or punish enemies. Law creates the framework within which all political action occurs, binding rulers as firmly as ruled. Fifth, the importance of political culture and civic virtue. Institutions shape character. While Montesquieu relies less on civic virtue than Rousseau, he recognizes that institutions alone don't determine outcomes. Political culture matters. Citizens must value liberty, respect law, participate responsibly, and resist tyranny. Some degree of civic virtue remains essential.
But crucially, Montesquieu argues institutions shape culture over time. Good institutional design encourages civic virtue. Bad design corrupts it. By creating government where power checks power, where officials are accountable, where rights are protected, you create incentives for responsible behavior and disincentives for tyranny. The structure itself teaches citizens political lessons. When they see officials constrained by law, checked by other branches, held accountable for abuses, they learn to value constitutional limits. When they see rights protected, even against majorities, they learn liberty means more than majority rule. The institutions themselves become civic education. Sixth, the danger of standing armies and military power. Montesquieu warns repeatedly that permanent military forces threaten liberty. Armies not actively fighting foreign wars naturally turn inward, becoming potential tools for domestic oppression. Military discipline contradicts civic freedom. Soldiers loyal to commanders rather than constitutional authority can enforce tyranny. Large, standing armies create constant temptation for rulers to use military force against internal opposition. They normalize obedience and hierarchy in ways inconsistent with Republican liberty. They drain resources that could support commerce and civic institutions. This influenced profound American suspicion of standing armies and preference for citizen militias reflected in the Second Amendment. It's also why modern democracies carefully subordinate military to civilian control, limit domestic military deployment, and maintain clear separation between military and law enforcement functions.
So where does Montesquieu leave us? What is his enduring legacy to political thought and practice? And what are his theory's genuine limitations that we must acknowledge honestly? Montesquieu gave us something truly revolutionary,
institutional architecture as the primary foundation of political liberty. Before him, political philosophy had focused overwhelmingly on who should rule. Should it be kings or people, aristocrats or citizens, the wise or the many, the virtuous or the legitimate? Montesquieu fundamentally shifted the question to how government should be structured, regardless of who holds office. His answer? It doesn't ultimately matter who rules if the system prevents tyranny through intelligent institutional design that divides power and creates checking mechanisms among competing centers of authority. Virtue is desirable but unreliable. You can't count on rulers being wise or good. Wisdom is valuable but rare. You can't depend on finding philosopher kings. Popular vigilance is necessary but exhausting. Citizens cannot constantly watch government to prevent tyranny. What you can count on is institutional self-interest, each branch jealously protecting its own power against encroachment, creating dynamic equilibrium where no one can dominate. This is Montesquieu's genius and his absolutely enduring contribution to political thought. Nearly 280 years after the Spirit of the Laws was published, we still build governments according to his essential blueprint. Separation of powers, checks and balances, judicial independence, bicameral legislatures, constitutional limits on authority. These are the default standard features of modern constitutional democracy worldwide. The proof of his influence is simply overwhelming. The American Constitution implements his models systematically. The French constitutions of 1791 and subsequent versions try to incorporate separation of powers. Latin American independence movements built their new governments on Montesquieu's principles. Post-colonial nations, from India to South Africa, designed constitutions featuring separated powers. The European Union's institutional structure echoes his logic. Even authoritarian regimes pay lip service to separation of powers because Montesquieu made it the international standard of governmental legitimacy. Yes, his theory has real limitations we must acknowledge. Gridlock is genuine and costly. When powers are separated and constantly checking each other, sometimes nothing gets done. Important legislation dies in deadlock. Crises go unaddressed. Needed reforms are blocked. Is protecting against tyranny worth the cost of governmental paralysis? Montesquieu says yes, but it's a real trade-off with real costs. He fundamentally misread England. His model doesn't accurately describe how England actually worked. Parliamentary systems with fused executive-legislative branches protect liberty without strict separation. Countries like Britain, Canada, Germany, and Australia demonstrate that Montesquieu's specific institutional prescription isn't the only way to protect freedom. Modern challenges strain his model in ways he couldn't anticipate. Administrative agencies that combine legislative rulemaking, executive enforcement, and judicial adjudication. Emergency powers that temporarily concentrate authority. National security claims that resist traditional checks. Intelligence agencies operating in secrecy. The rise of political parties that can coordinate action across branches, potentially overcoming institutional separation. The system leaks and adapts in ways Montesquieu didn't perceive. Separation can be captured if all branches fall under control of a unified faction. If the same political party or ideological movement controls presidency, Congress, and through prior appointments the judiciary, checking mechanisms can fail. Partisan loyalty might trump institutional loyalty, collapsing the separation that protects liberty.
But despite these genuine limitations, Montesquieu's fundamental framework remains indispensable for understanding and protecting constitutional government. Why? Because he solved a problem that every free society perpetually faces: How do you prevent tyranny without relying on the impossible virtue of rulers or the exhausting constant vigilance of citizens? His answer: design institutions where power checks power through competing institutional interests works. Not perfectly, not in every circumstance, not without adaptation to specific contexts, but it works better than available alternatives. Better than trusting in virtuous rulers who inevitably disappoint. Better than hoping citizens will remain constantly vigilant when they're busy living their lives. Better than concentrating power in any single person or body and trusting they won't abuse it. The proof is in historical results. Governments built explicitly on Montesquieu's principles, particularly the United States Constitution, have protected liberty longer and more successfully than virtually any other governmental system in human history. The Constitution has endured over 235 years through civil war, economic catastrophe, world wars, profound social transformations, and dramatic changes in territory, population, and circumstances. Parliamentary democracies, though structurally different, have incorporated many Montesquieu's principles: judicial independence, constitutional limits, institutional checks, even within parliamentary systems through bicameralism, federalism, and strong committee systems. Even when they don't follow his specific model, they honor his core insight. Power must be divided, checked, and limited institutionally. Even authoritarian regimes feel compelled to simulate separation of powers, creating facade institutions that pretend to check executive authority. Why bother with the pretense? Because Montesquieu's ideas made constitutionalism with separated powers the international standard of legitimate government. Naked tyranny without institutional pretense became illegitimate in ways it wasn't before Montesquieu.
This is Montesquieu's ultimate gift to humanity. Not perfect government, immune to all abuse, but government deliberately designed to work with imperfect humans as they actually are. Government that assumes ambition, selfishness, power-seeking, and institutional rivalry and uses those very human vices to protect liberty. Government that doesn't require philosophical wisdom, moral perfection, or constant popular mobilization, but just institutional jealousy and constitutional structure intelligently designed. When you hear about checks and balances, about separation of powers, about constitutional limits on governmental authority, about judicial review, about federalism, about bicameral legislatures, about any of the institutional mechanisms that characterize modern constitutional democracy, remember, that's not ancient wisdom discovered in classical texts. That's not natural law written in the cosmos. That's Montesquieu. One French aristocrat, studying governments comparatively, traveling Europe to observe institutions firsthand, thinking deeply and systematically about how political systems actually function rather than how they theoretically should function, and then writing it all down in a massive, sprawling, endlessly fascinating book that became the operating system, the basic architecture, the fundamental blueprint of constitutional democracy. The spirit of the laws isn't just philosophy or political theory. It's the instruction manual we still follow when building free governments.